Canada is following in our G7 partners' footsteps and creating a high-speed rail line connecting Toronto and Quebec City. Our Parliament Hill correspondent Glenn McGregor joining us now. Glenn, we heard from officials this morning providing more details. What do we know about the scope of this project?
Yeah, Faiza, most political leaders at the end of their time in office look towards things that could be considered legacy projects, things that will endure long after they're out of politics and even long after they're still alive. This, I think, would certainly qualify. Less than a month to go before Justin Trudeau is no longer Prime Minister, and he announces this massive project, an incredible, and he calls it a nation-building project. It is going to be the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history. High-speed rail of the kind that many Canadians may have ridden on when they were in Italy or France or even China or Japan, connecting Toronto to Quebec City. The route would go through Peterborough, up along that corridor, Highway 7, as some people may know it is, that goes through Marlborough and places like that, up to Ottawa, then across to Montreal, through Laval, into Trois-Rivières, and ultimately in Quebec City, 1,000 kilometers of rail line with trains running at about 300 kilometers an hour, really would effectively halve the current travel time on via trains between Toronto and Montreal. Here is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announcing what they're going to be doing today.
It'll turbocharge our entire economy, create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, and open new opportunities for Canadian businesses at every link of our supply chain. Just think about the 4,000 kilometers of steel rail that we're going to need to lay. That's steel, aluminum, copper, resources we have that we can use here in Canada.
Now, Trudeau says that the development phase of this project, that is the building of it, is going to take about 5 years, but it's going to be probably 10 or 12 years before trains actually start running on that path. He says that 51,000 jobs would be created during that period, and once it's up and running, he's projecting a boost to Canada's gross domestic product of $35 billion annually. Interestingly, this project, it was a result of a competitive tendering process. As recently as last summer, the federal government was still pursuing something called high-frequency rail, not high-speed rail. That is, more trains running more often between those cities on that corridor that would go through Peterborough up along Highway 7, rather than going along Lake Ontario as the via trains currently do, connecting places like Kingston, Belleville, Brockville along there. So those communities presumably would still have some kind of rail service in future, but the main line would be going to the north. And so they tendered this contract. There were apparently 3 groups bidding on it. It was won by a consortium called Cadence that includes Air Canada, oddly enough, because we think these train service, the high-speed trains will be competing with airlines for passenger service. Also in the consortium, SNCF Voyageur, which is a subsidiary of the French national rail system that runs the TGV, as well as a company called Atkins Realis, which is kind of the successor of the engineering giant based in Quebec called SNC Lavalin. This is going to cost, of course, an enormous amount of money, but most of the money appears to be coming from that consortium of private sector companies. Here is the Transport Minister, Anita Anand, explaining how that's going to work.
The entire high-speed project should be seen in 3 phases. First, the procurement phase. The bidder has now been chosen. Second, the co-development phase, $3.9 billion over 5 years. And third, the construction phase, where finalized details that are determined during phase 2 will be executed.
So the big question is, what happens to this project once Justin Trudeau is gone and we don't know who is going to form the next government, whether they would necessarily support this, whether it's another Liberal government led by Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney or Karina Gould, or whether it's a Pierre Poilievre Conservative government, whether or not they would still be on side it. The fact that they are signing contracts, now they've got through this initial phase, procurement, now kind of inking this deal, there would be presumably some penalties to the federal government if they did cancel it. But it is $3.9 billion, certainly a lot of money over 5 years, but still comparatively small. Most of the financial burden here being borne by this consortium. We have to see the fine print on that contract to see exactly what the liabilities are for the federal government in the future. Of course, this is going to be very complicated in terms of getting all the kind of easements that were required to run these rails. There is existing track, though, through that route, or through lots of that route, at least through Ontario. And then into Quebec, there may have to be negotiations with First Nations. There will be, of course, environmental concerns that all have to be dealt with, but having the federal government on side makes that process a lot easier. And then there is, of course, the situation with the tariffs in the United States. Trudeau was asked repeatedly in that press conference about whether or not there would be specific requirements to buy Canadian, although he didn't really kind of answer whether or not that would actually be the case, whether or not those trains would be made in Canada, whether or not any of the other materials would be have to be sourced from Canada, although he did refer to the fact that there would be 4,000 kilometers of steel rail. That's in 1,000 kilometers, 4 sets, so you have a rail in each direction. So a lot of steel being involved in this. We'll see later today how the Conservatives react to this. One thing that they may be concerned about, FISA, is the fact that all this money is being spent in Ontario and Quebec, not in Alberta. There's been lots of talk in Alberta about connecting Calgary and Edmonton with high-speed rail. That, of course, not mentioned today.
Okay, Glenn McGregor in Ottawa with this breakdown. We appreciate it.